imagine what it will be like when I walk by your side.
I'm 12 years old. I am standing in front of the congregation of my church in Grand Rapids, Michigan, making the most important proclamation of my life up until this point. Seeing everyone stare back at me is slightly terrifying, but I've made my decision to participate in this ceremony, and I am going to do it. I'm affirming my belief today that God has selected me as a member of His elect, the special group of people to whom salvation is offered freely and unconditionally. I'm accepting that offer and professing my faith, not just in the salvation of my soul, brought about by our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, but in all the canons and creeds of the Christian Reformed Church. I am wholeheartedly asserting that all the things that the Church holds to be true are also things that I believe. After all, the CRC is a confessional denomination. To hold a belief in conflict with any of those confessions is heretical. And to be very, very clear, I am not a heretic. I'm a believer. A believer stands by the courage of his convictions, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. The Christian Reformed Church in North America is a Protestant denomination founded in Holland, Michigan in 1857 as a splinter group from the Reformed Church in America. The big concept for this audio essay, by the way, is music to sort of give you a sense of place and time. So just imagine, I don't know, a bunch of perverts clogging in their wooden shoes under this part. Anyway, the schism sent shockwaves across Dutch immigrant communities in Iowa and Michigan as Reformed churches pondered a difficult decision: either reaffiliate with the new denomination, the CRCNA, or commit to the old, the RCA. Either way, unity was no longer possible. In 1876, the CRC founded an institution of higher learning in Grand Rapids, approximately 28 miles east of Holland, named Calvin College, after the French theologian John Calvin, and the denomination and school grew into really the twin linchpins of West Michigan's culture and economy. The CRC counts around 35,000 members in the greater Grand Rapids metropolitan area alone, while Calvin continues to graduate approximately 750 students each year. In both absolute and relative terms, the CRC is a small and shrinking denomination, boasting a peak membership of 316,415 in 1992, and a current membership of 189,753. Being an evangelical church, the CRC has sought to offset these membership losses by planting new churches across North America. And these newer congregations have diversified the denomination's membership while expanding its geographical footprint beyond its traditional Midwestern regional core. And now, almost 150 years since its inception, the denomination is preparing to shed dozens of affiliated churches, many of them located in Grand Rapids, in a schism over gender and sexuality that reflects the broader fault lines of the culture war among evangelical Christians in North America. But to get there, we first have to travel back in time to 1970, when the church found itself confronting the novel, burgeoning phenomenon of open homosexuality. All right, so picture this. You're the average Dutch Protestant living in Ontario. The Parliament of Canada has just decriminalized same-sex sexual activity, and your denomination is not yet equipped with a consistent line for how to deal with this change. And you're worried about this. So, to figure out how to address the issue, you do what all good Protestants do, and you form a committee. In 1973, a man named Clarence Boomsma presented Report 42 of the Committee to Study Homosexuality to Synod, the annual convening of the governing body of the CRC. The report cites the standard verses well known to anyone who's engaged with traditionalist Christian thought about this issue, such as Romans 1 verses 26 through 27.
Because of this, God gave them over to shameful lusts. Even their women exchanged natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. In the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error.
Citing exegesis of this and other verses, the committee came to its conclusion.
Homosexuality, male and female, is a condition of disordered sexuality which reflects the brokenness of our sinful world, and for which the homosexual may himself bear only a minimal responsibility. Homosexualism, as explicit homosexual practice, must be condemned as incompatible with obedience to the will of God as revealed in Holy Scripture.
However, the report doesn't end there. It takes what it sees as an empathetic approach to the plight of the homosexual, noting that gay Christians struggle with their sinful temptations and should not be condemned simply for having the attraction.
The task of the Church is to come with compassion to those who bear a heavy cross and encourage them with the means of God's grace. Bring them the saving word of forgiveness when they stumble and fall. Admonish them in love so they may repent and be renewed. Embrace them in the warmth of Christian fellowship so they may find strength and support to bear their burden. In order to live a life of chastity in obedience to God's will, the homosexual needs the loving support and encouragement of the Church. The Church should therefore so include him in its fellowship that he is not tempted by rejection and loneliness to seek companionship in a gay world, whose immoral lifestyle is alien to a Christian.
The contrast between these excerpts is, and you can probably hear this, tonally representative of the report more broadly. It just hammers the point over and over and over again. Like, thing number one, the orientation of homosexuality per se is the result of a fallen world. Therefore, pursuing same-sex relations is sinful and off limits. However, the homosexual himself is not beyond salvation. The report encourages gay people to submit their desires to Christ, take a vow of chastity, and pursue so-called therapeutic aid to try and cure the problem. But it also acknowledges that some people won't be able to stop feeling these disordered tendencies and calls for the Church to, quote, wholeheartedly embrace, end quote, gay parishioners. So Report 42 would remain the core guidance about this issue in the denomination for the better part of 50 years, but it was worded fairly broadly and it wasn't considered confessional. In other words, if a given church wanted to be more lenient regarding how it treated gay parishioners, it theoretically could do so without censure from the denomination. But a document that the CRC did and does treat as confessional truth, the Heidelberg Catechism, states the following in question and answer number 108.
What does the seventh commandment teach us? That God condemns all unchastity, and that therefore we should thoroughly detest it, and live decent and chaste lives within or outside the holy state of marriage.
So, if the denomination considers homosexual sex to be a sinful violation of the seventh commandment, what if a given church interprets the matter differently? What if that church affirms monogamous same-sex relationships, unions, or even marriage? Can such a congregation assert these positions while remaining confessional? The ambiguity of Report 42 put the denomination on a slow but irrevocable collision course. Eventually, the question would need to be settled.
Luda. Now I may not be the worst or the best, but you gotta respect my honesty.
I am 20 years old. I have no idea where I want to go in life. I've enrolled at Calvin College. My parents both went and met there, as did my dad's parents. I don't really know what it is that I want out of life yet, other than a broad sense of figuring out who I am. I'm still dialed into the idea of the reformed mind, and I want to get my own mind reformed a bit more. As a school owned by the Christian Reformed Church, Calvin has attracted me because, unlike many other confessional Christian colleges, it holds itself to a pretty high standard of academic rigor. Its faculty cover a range of ideological positions, and the independence of their research and perspective is protected by a strong tenure policy. Unfortunately, the first 2 years have not been what I was hoping for. I'm not finding the diversity of thought that I was expecting. I'm learning in an academic sense, but my world isn't growing. All of the promises I'd heard about how it would expand my horizons far beyond what I could get in another setting are ringing hollow. I submit a transfer application to the University of Michigan that is summarily rejected. The event horizon has narrowed. I am going to be affiliated with this institution for the rest of my life. I stopped going to church. I spend the next 2 years depressed and angry, but somehow manage to graduate. I move to New York City at the earliest possible opportunity. I discover a world outside of the bubble that contained all I knew for the first 22 years of my life, and in that world I find an abundance of joy. I marry my spouse, a queer person whom I met at Calvin, and we begin building a new life together, far away from the confines of the CRC. I don't think much about the denomination for the next few years.
This is my fight song. Take back my life song.
On June 6, 2015, the United States Supreme Court ruled in the landmark case Obergefell v. Hodges that the Due Process and Equal Protection Clauses of the 16th Amendment confer a right to same-sex marriage. A protection that had previously been decided on a state-by-state level was now fully guaranteed across the nation, overturning laws such as California's same-sex marriage ban Proposition 8, which was amended into the state constitution by ballot initiative and funded by notable CRC donors, including Elsa Prince, in 2008. As with Canada's decision to decriminalize same-sex relations in 1969, the Obergefell decision once again forced a question in the Christian Reformed Church. Where should the denomination stand on the issue nearly a half-century later? The Synod of 2016 decided to
appoint a new study committee to articulate a foundation-laying biblical theology of human sexuality that pays particular attention to biblical conceptions of gender and sexuality. The central aim of this theological task will be to provide concise yet clear ethical guidance for what constitutes a holy and healthy Christian sexual life, and in light of this, to serve the church with pastoral, ecclesial, and missional guidance that explains how the gospel provides redemptive affirmation and hope for those experiencing sexual questioning, temptation, and sin.
In May 2020, Neeland Avenue Christian Reformed Church, a congregation on the southeast side of Grand Rapids, ordained a new deacon, an office bearer of the church who deals with financial and logistical concerns. Unlike every other deacon to ever serve in the CRC up until this point, however, this woman was openly gay and married to another woman. Horrified traditionalists saw not just a breach of protocol, but an active endorsement of sinful behavior in direct contradiction of the church's confessions, and petitioned the denomination to address the matter immediately. However, due to the COVID pandemic, Synod would not convene in 2020. In 2021, after 5 years of research, the study committee published a report officially titled Biblical Theology of Human Sexuality, informally referred to as the Human Sexuality Report, or HSR. After some preamble, the HSR breaks out into 3 major topics: pornography, gender identity, and homosexuality. Now, I'm just going to level with you right now. This report sucks. It is a reactionary screed riddled with out-of-date, specious, and or outright counterfactual information about everything it covers. While the bulk of accurate, peer-reviewed data on the science of gender and sexuality is relegated to an appendix, the body of the report throws out assertions that contradict its footnotes, dead names and misgenders every transgender person it identifies, and casts proponents of gender-affirming care as zealous cultural warriors who, seek to destroy these honest moderates who are just asking questions. The HSR also doubled down on the conclusions regarding homosexuality that Report 42 made back in 1973. While there's nothing inherently sinful about being attracted to the same sex, a hermeneutical study of Genesis, Leviticus, the words of Christ, and the Pauline epistles reveals that same-sex intimacy is a form of sexual immorality and therefore a sin. Most crucially, the report affirmed that its conclusions are all to be treated as confessional, making a prohibition of gay marriage every bit as binding on CRC congregations as the canons of Dort's ringing condemnation of Jacob Arminius and his fucking bullshit all the way back in 1619. To make the report official, Synod would still need to vote, but seeing the disarray brought about by the release of the report, alongside concerns about an in-person event so soon after the acute period of the COVID pandemic, the CRC's Council of Delegates again decided to cancel Synod for 2021, issuing the following statement.
There is a polarity in the opinions expressed between protecting the health and well-being of individuals and protecting the health and well-being of the denomination. It can feel as if there is no win-win solution.
In March 2022, it came to light that a female employee of Calvin's Center for Social Research had married another woman in a ceremony officiated by a Calvin professor, leading the school to disaffiliate itself from the center entirely in April. Students and faculty alike protested this decision, but the school held fast, pointing to long-standing university policy banning same-sex relationships as held by the traditions of its parent denomination and owner, the Christian Reformed Church. The question of homosexuality was no longer an issue, it was the issue, both in the denomination and the university. Synod 2022 needed to come to a conclusive answer. I'm 32 years old, and numerous friends from Michigan have told me about this HSR thing, including my friend and fellow Calvin alum Brian Alford, with whom I've been working on a new podcast. I decide that I should see what happened for myself and sit down to watch the recently concluded proceedings of Synod 2022 on YouTube. Synod is held every June on Calvin's campus at the Fine Arts Center, an impressive theater that easily converts to a large conference hall. On the wall and hidden in the rafters are the massive pipes of a booming 2,036-piece pipe organ. Above the floor dangle hundreds of pendant lights, an incandescent canopy that dazzled me as a child every time I looked up. The delegates assemble at tables designated by classis, the regional bodies to which every church is assigned based on geography. Discussion on whether to adopt the recommendations of the HSR begins on Tuesday afternoon. Proponents of the report are largely careful to couch their opinions in the same paternalistic, patronizing framing of gentle but firm moral correction that suffused Report 42 in 1973. The opponents of the HSR frame their arguments in non-combative language, appealing to the Christian virtues of mercy, patience, grace, and redemption. After a day and a half of debate, the report passes by a 69% majority, officially making homosexuality a confessional issue in the CRC. The next order of business is a binding motion to instruct Kneeland Avenue to rescind their gay deacon's ordination, now more than 2 years after they originally approved her. This motion passes by a 75% majority. The body also votes to admonish Classis Grand Rapids East for not taking care of business sooner. Among the delegates from Grand Rapids East is Larry Louders, an elder at the newly sanctioned Kneeland Avenue CRC. Louders, a professor emeritus and former department chair of chemistry at Calvin, came here to defend his church's decision. He has been one of the most frequent speakers throughout the session, and Louders requests an opportunity to speak one final time. The chair permits his request, and Louders, clearly emotionally raw from the marathon session and its outcome, stands in front of the entire synod and begins to address the body.
We have done and built a wall, very nice. I understand protection of the holiness of the church, but we've lost a little view of grace in this process, and that I mourn. Okay. So that is going to be a hard thing. Now, what are we going to do? We're going to take this seriously. But I will say we're not likely to initiate discipline against this couple. That's what got us in this pickle in the first place. These people were judged to be members in good standing, and I still remember the council meeting, and for the third year in a row, this young lady was getting the most votes. And I looked at everybody around the room and I says, we have two choices here. We can either honor the wishes of the congregation and see them as a call from God, or we have to make them members not in good standing. We have to place them under church discipline. And I went around the room and I said, are you willing to do that? No one is willing to do that. And now I have to go back and do that this time. And I don't think we're going to have the stomach to do that. But we want to be here in the CRC. And folks, we have mourned and lamented the way we've dealt with our LGBTQ brothers and sisters. We have just set the bar impossibly high to do that in love. I don't know how we do that when you come people who are seeing the gift. I wish we had the breath to interpret these scriptures as not pertaining to homosexual activity in a committed marriage. We can still have a high standard of marriage. But now you have These folks,
At this point, Louders is interrupted by Blake Campbell, an ordained minister and delegate from Classis, Ileana.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. We just made a decision, and you have the gall to stand up there and tell the body that you are not going to abide by what the body decided and what they gave the General Secretary to do. Please stop.
It's been over 2 years now, and I still don't know what to do with this moment. I cannot fathom watching a broken man try to process his emotions and sense of betrayal in real time, only to come to the conclusion that he's insufficiently remorseful and must be shut down immediately. I can't imagine making this my fight. And yet I remember the prosecutorial zeal I felt towards sin when I was a child. Us against them, a corrupt world that only Christ can conquer. Me, his foot soldier and proud member of the elect, taking commands to reform the world and fight God's enemies on his behalf. Like, if I hadn't left the bubble, would my zeal have turned into this kind of anger? I feel nauseous. One of the delegates brings forward a motion to initiate something called special discipline against Louders in response to his speech, a motion which is quickly seconded. The chair will soon rule this motion out of order, break down in tears, and request a prayer to calm the assembly, but I don't know that because I've already turned off the TV. With the confessional status of homosexuality a settled issue, the next 2 years of the CRC Synod were largely consumed with logistical questions around discipline and order. Synod 2023 doubled down on the decisions of 2022, rejecting an appeal for reconsideration from Neeland Avenue, while explicitly commanding all church office bearers to comply with the full guidance of the HSR without reservation. Synod 2024, this past summer, suspended office bearers from non-compliant churches, giving them a deadline to either come back into compliance or disaffiliate from the denomination completely. I took a look at some posts that were made a week or two after this all happened, and based on those posts, the churches affected by the denominational decision seem to have largely moved on from the bargaining stage of grief now that all avenues have been ruled out, either mourning the denomination as they knew it or charting plans for a new future. For many of these people, a world outside the CRC is unimaginable, just as it was for me before I graduated from college and set out on my own. And the transition out of the denomination will likely be one of the most painful experiences of their lives.
So lamentable that churches committed to showing the love of Christ to all people are being forced out of the denomination. Unbelievably sad. I've been a member of the CRC all my life, and this heavy-handed decision seems much more fundamentalist than reformed. Whatever happened to the idea of reformed and reforming?
Saddest part of all Synod this year happened while watching the other evening with teenage son. After a while, his summary response was, "And that is why I'll never make profession of faith or something like that in any church." And I couldn't argue with him.
At the end of Synod last year, I revoked my membership. I could not, in good conscience, remain a member. I wrestled with that decision and have been on a journey. I tried to watch Synod this year, hoping for understanding and direction. What I have is confirmation that my decision was the right one. My heart is so broken.
If the future of the CRC as a denomination is unclear, the future of Calvin is opaque. During the 2010s, the school suffered from the same decrease of available students impacting academia across the United States, and as a response, pivoted away from a traditional liberal arts education through a series of curriculum cuts, staff layoffs, and faculty buyouts. Nominally a university since 2019, Calvin does appear to finally be reversing the years-long trend of declining enrollment. But what kind of a university will it be? After Synod 2022, a group of Calvin faculty members submitted an official statement expressing their disagreement with the CRC's decision to make homosexuality a confessional issue. The Board of Trustees did accept that statement, allowing these professors to remain in good standing with the school and the denomination for the time being. However, the 2024 Synod effectively disallowed the use of such statements on this issue for church office bearers, and most importantly, encouraged Calvin to follow suit. In April 2023, Joseph Kailama, a former professor of social work at Calvin, sued the school under the Elliott Larson Civil Rights Act for terminating his employment in 2022, claiming that it was an act of retaliation for performing a queer wedding ceremony in 2021. And that was the exact same ceremony that had prompted Calvin to disaffiliate from its Center for Social Research. Notably, Kailama had previously been denied tenure in 2018 by Calvin's Board of Trustees, despite unanimous peer recommendation. As long as Calvin remains owned by the CRC, it increasingly looks like a place where the question of homosexuality will only have one acceptable answer. I am 12 years old. I'm standing in front of the congregation of my church, and a ray of sun shines through the stained glass windows and catches the dust falling from the rafters as the smell of old wood and mildew mixes with the stultifying humidity of the Michigan summer. The pews creak as I notice John, an older member of the congregation who survived Nazi incarceration in the Netherlands during World War II, adjust his posture and look forward expectantly. Seated near him is Clarence, who island hopped with the Navy Seabees during that same war and recently retiled my family's downstairs bathroom. The women who prayed for me every single day while I was in the hospital, both when I was a baby and more recently, are all beaming, sitting in their customary position toward the back of the right side of the sanctuary. Louise, the head of the group, played basketball with my grandma at Calvin. She recently commissioned me to build her a website to sell prints of her photos of flowers. I don't think she's sold any yet. I'm also pretty sure that wasn't really the point. Annette and Johanna, the twins, sit nearby. Jo is even more dependent on her sister than she used to be ever since she lost her mobility to Lou Gehrig's disease. I still make sure to go talk to Jo after every Sunday service, patiently waiting as she articulates each individual word. I'm not always clear on what she's saying, especially through her very thick Dutch accent, but I know Net really appreciates it. For every single one of the 300 faces staring at me right now, I have a story to tell. These are the people who changed my diapers in church nursery, told me to stop getting up and walking around during Sunday school, cooked the borderline inedible midweek meals I ate every Wednesday evening, told me I was special, heard my young voice, and affirmed that it meant something, that I was worthy of love, of being part of this community of believers, of accepting the plan that God laid out for me before I was even born. Just as I heard so many times in Jeremiah 29:11, which I can still quote from memory, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." I stand in this moment of my memory imagining that future, full of hope that the people who see me now will stand beside me later. And then the moment disappears.